And welcome back, FM Talk 1065 in Mobile Mornings with Dan Brennan and Dalton Orwig, and Bryan Comer back in studio with Tobias and Comer Law. Bryan, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So I don't know if you've noticed, if you've read the news lately, but there have been some accidents out there.
Yeah.
Lots of accidents.
Unfortunately so.
And where we are right here at the intersection of I-65 and I-10, maybe we see more than a lot of other cities. I'm not sure how that stacks up, but I would put money on it that we see more accidents on the interstate than most other places, especially when there's ongoing construction, which I want to get to here in a little bit. But as we were talking during the break, you brought up in a lot of these cases you see involving accidents, how there are different levels to, I guess, is criminality the right word? I guess not necessarily, because you can be in an accident that's an actual accident, completely unintentional, but there's other levels past that. Kind of explain that the way you were explaining it to me.
Yeah, sure. So criminality, that's one way you could put it. Culpability is usually what we talk about.
That's better.
Well, I don't know about better, but so yeah, what I always tell folks is when you're thinking of what kind of conduct was the other driver doing or the other person doing, or the company or whatever, I always explain that in terms of a ladder. If you think of a ladder with 3 rungs, the top rung of that ladder is intentional conduct. And that's extremely rare, thankfully. And that might get into the criminality that you were talking about a minute ago. But that is, I intend to cause you harm, and I do. I intend to hit you, and I do. Okay? The bottom rung of that ladder is something called negligence. And that's what a lot of folks, whether it's a car wreck case, whether it's somebody's injured on somebody else's premises, whether it's, all sorts of things fall into negligence. Negligence is simply the failure to use reasonable care under the circumstances. Well, then there's the middle rung, and that middle rung is something called wantonness. Wantonness is the failure or disregard of the health and safety of other people. And that's a heightened sense, right? And so, like, if you're thinking of it in terms of that ladder, that's one rung up. That's where you get out of the I'm following too closely and I rear end somebody, negligence.
Right.
That's the I choose to drink and drive and am intoxicated or use drugs and drive, or even potentially text and drive, could raise to that level of wantonness. And with that comes all sorts of things, including something called punitive damages to punish the bad actor. So that's a good example. Or I'm a visual person, and so you think of it in terms of that ladder rung.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. And it follows that the most common would be just complete negligence, unintentional, and then the rarest of those would be the intentional homicides. But I think more and more often we're seeing that wantonness, and maybe it's because of the phones that are so ubiquitous now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a very good point. I mean, it's something more than just a heightened sense of negligence. I mean, it is I choose to drink and drive, right? I choose to do something extremely dangerous, and it's not even there was a recent case out of the Alabama Supreme Court where somebody said on like Airport Boulevard at 5 o'clock on a Friday, I'm going to try to shoot the gap there and cross in front. That's not wantonness. That's still in that negligent standpoint.
Right.
But this is something that, and texting, there is a bunch of research that's out there. I actually had an expert in a case one time that studied this, and the distraction level for your perception and reaction time from texting and driving and looking away from the road at the screen was comparable to being 0.08 DUI.
Wow.
Yeah, and so and that's the thing. It's all about speed and perception and reaction, and how quickly it usually takes you about a second and a half under normal conditions to see and react.
Talking with Bryan Comer with Tobias and Comer Law, local personal injury law firm. And speaking of being distracted, you were talking about kind of an experiment, you could call it, maybe on this show, Brain Games. I've seen a few episodes of it. Haven't seen them all, and I haven't seen this one. But they had like beach balls at the back of a truck, and someone following. I'm sure they did different car lengths back, and how reactive they were to that. Is that kind of how they broke that experiment?
Yeah, absolutely. Down? So the same expert who had the studies about the texting and driving looked at even using Bluetooth technology in driving, and we all do that, right? We're all on the phone while we're driving, and even using the hands-free stuff. The test was to drive in a controlled environment. They were throwing beach balls at a guy driving the car, and the guy was asked simple questions over the Bluetooth speaker. What's your wife's maiden name? And some people might have more trouble with that than others. But, but even simple questions like that, he couldn't do that and focus on moving, swerving, and missing the beach balls. And so that's the thing. We really want to focus on accident prevention.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it all comes down to choices that are made. I choose to look at the phone. I choose to fiddle with the radio. I choose, unfortunately, people do to drink while or drive while impaired. But that's the thing. We want to focus on being aware of your surroundings so that perception and reaction time is enough to make sure you don't cause a wreck.
And I can only speak for myself, and most of the time I can do that. Sometimes I can't speak for myself, but I'm overconfident. I'm an overconfident driver. I think I'm Chase Elliott sometimes when I get out there, and that's just not the case. And, even when you're having a conversation with someone and you ask them a question they have to think about, and I'm sure you see this often in your line of work, and their eyes kind of point to that top right-hand corner of the screen because they're thinking.
Right.
If that's happening even while you're on speakerphone, that's just something else. It just goes to show how quickly something like that can happen. We both know folks from Mississippi who drive over this way. A lot of listeners that we have right now are listening to us, maybe going through the construction zones, but lots of construction on 10, especially in West Mobile. And that's caused some issues for a lot of our listeners, a lot of people we know. And construction zones, it's obvious, but that's one of the most dangerous places out there on the road, not only for those construction workers who are not in vehicles themselves, but for the people in front of and behind you.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there. And it goes kind of hand in hand with what we were just talking about even if you're on Bluetooth, you're where that conversation is, and the risk and the danger to the construction workers, to the other motorists, to the people in your car is so heightened in that scenario. And so you've got less time to react. People are supposed to be driving slower, but everybody gets bottlenecked right there. And so that's even more of an important reason to focus on where you are, be where your feet are, and focus on the cars and traffic around you.
Yeah, and not following too close.
Absolutely.
Major part of that.
Slow
of course.
down.
Yeah, and also eliminating distractions, which goes hand in hand with everything we've talked about. And while it's been a dry fall, also the rain adds to that as well. And we've talked about that in the past, how be even extra careful when that's going on. And I guess Bama, so they've increased the fine in construction zones. So if you didn't already have enough reason to be careful and watch that speed when you're flying through there, hopefully not flying through these construction zones, that fine was risen just about 2 years ago. So another reason to be careful.
Yeah, and it used to just apply to speeding in traffic zones in construction zones when workers were present, but now that applies to any traffic infraction. So following too closely, not giving enough of a signal before you change lanes, changing lanes without a signal. All of those are now double fines if there's workers present.
Well, some great things you've given us to think about here on these roads, and this is a true public service announcement because people need to know that even if you are as confident as a NASCAR driver, you're out there, things can happen in just an instant. You have a lot of information like this and on plenty more topics at tobiascomerlaw.com, but also phone number people can call for a free consultation at any time.
Absolutely. 251-432-5001.
All right. Hey, I appreciate you coming back in, Bryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dalton.
That's Bryan Comer with Tobias and Comer Law. Again, you can find them online, tobiascomerlaw.com. And that does it for Mobile Mornings right here on FM Talk 106.5. Coming up next, The Jeff Poor Show.